I never expected her to lean on me like she belonged there. And in that moment, everything changed. It started on an ordinary evening, the kind of quiet that makes you notice everything you normally ignore. I had just returned from a long day, my mind half on work and half on the thought of what I might cook for dinner. That's when I saw her, my neighbor's sister, standing by the staircase landing, balancing a stack of packages with a calm precision I couldn't help but admire. She was older, yes. Her aura spoke of life lived fully, of confidence shaped by experience. But there was something gentle in the way she moved, an almost unintentional grace that made the air around her feel warmer. I hesitated, unsure if I should speak, but she caught my gaze and offered a small, quiet smile, the kind that lingers in memory more than it lasts in real time. She wasn't aware of it, but that smile made me suddenly self-conscious of the way I stood, awkwardly gripping the strap of my backpack. Our first interaction was brief, almost incidental. I stepped aside to let her pass in the narrow hallway. Her shoulder brushed against mine, just lightly, but enough to send a ripple of awareness through me. Not the jolt of attraction you read about in novels, but something softer, subtler, a quiet recognition that there was an energy in her presence that made ordinary moments feel significant. There was the faint scent of her perfume, warm and woody, comforting in a way I couldn't place. I noticed her hands, long, confident fingers adjusting the packages with care. And when she laughed softly at a small mishap with a box, the sound was unassuming, yet it stayed with me as I climbed the stairs to my apartment. I caught myself replaying the encounter as I unpacked my own groceries, realizing I'd watched her leave longer than necessary. Her presence left a kind of gentle echo, a mixture of curiosity and quiet fascination. I didn't know her, yet something in the way she carried herself suggested a familiarity, as though she could belong in my world, even though logically she shouldn't. For the first time in months, I felt that tension between caution and intrigue, the pull towards someone I barely knew, and the hesitation that comes with realizing how much life experience separated us. I could sense the unspoken layers in her gaze, the kind that hinted at stories untold and emotions carefully kept in check. It was a quiet magnetism, subtle enough to be almost invisible, but impossible to ignore. By the time I closed my apartment door, I understood that this wouldn't be a fleeting encounter. Her calm confidence, her unassuming warmth, and the faint, fleeting touch of her presence had stirred something in me I wasn't ready to name. Something told me this quiet hallway meeting was the first brushstroke of a story that would unfold slowly, carefully, in ways neither of us could predict. A few days after that first brief encounter, our worlds collided again, almost by accident. I was carrying groceries up the narrow staircase when I heard a soft voice behind me, calling my name. Turning, I saw her, the neighbor's sister, standing at the landing with a warm smile, holding a small basket of flowers. Somehow, in the everyday rhythm of our building, we kept finding ourselves in the same spaces. It wasn't planned, and yet, every accidental meeting felt deliberate in its own strange way. As she stepped closer to hand me a bouquet that had tumbled slightly from her basket, her shoulder brushed mine again. This time, I noticed the gentle pressure, the reassuring steadiness of her hand on my arm, and a fleeting warmth spread through me. It was a touch that said nothing in words, yet carried the quiet comfort of trust. We walked together down the hallway, side by side, her pace calm, measured, as if she belonged exactly where she was. I noticed the subtle scent of jasmine from her scarf, mingling with the faint aroma of her soap and the floral basket. Every little sensory detail seemed magnified, the soft tap of her shoes against the tile, the quiet rhythm of her breathing, the way her gaze lingered just enough to make me aware of it without forcing attention. For the first time, I realized how natural her presence felt. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was a strange, grounding calm, as if she had the ability to make the space around her feel lighter. She laughed softly at a joke I didn't even realize I had made, her eyes crinkling at the corners. I caught myself smiling, feeling both surprised and unusually at ease. As we reached my floor, she leaned slightly to place the basket on a step, and I instinctively offered a hand to steady it. Our fingers brushed, again, a fleeting touch, but enough to send a small, electric jolt through my chest. I noticed how her hand felt, confident yet gentle, strong yet careful. It left me thinking about her even after she turned away. It was a subtle shift, almost imperceptible. The comfort I felt in her presence, the way proximity didn't feel intrusive, the quiet acknowledgement that being near her was somehow easier than being apart. I sensed an unspoken permission in the way she moved around me, a silent invitation to be close without saying anything. Later, I caught myself replaying every moment of that brief interaction. The way her hair fell slightly over her shoulder as she adjusted the basket, the faint warmth of her elbow brushing mine, the soft cadence of her voice. Each detail lingered, and I realized that these small, accidental proximities were weaving a thread between us, delicate yet undeniable. By the time she disappeared around the corner, I understood that these chance encounters were no longer just coincidences. There was an invisible pull, subtle but persistent, that made my chest tighten and my mind linger on her presence far longer than any ordinary neighbor should. Something unspoken was forming, a quiet connection that neither of us could yet name, but both of us were starting to feel. It started with a simple invitation, tea, in her apartment, just the two of us. She said it casually, almost as if it were nothing, but the way she said it carried a quiet trust that made my chest tighten. I wasn't sure why I felt nervous. I'd shared rooms with friends, colleagues, even family before, but being in her space felt different, intimate without being overwhelming. Her apartment was warm, filled with soft light and the faint scent of lavender. She moved gracefully around the kitchen, preparing tea, and I found myself noticing details I hadn't before. The slight crease near her eyes when she smiled, the way her hands moved with calm precision as she poured hot water, and the way her voice carried a gentle reassurance when she asked if I liked sugar. We settled on the couch, sitting side by side but not touching, yet every slight shift in posture seemed to bring us closer. She started talking about something personal, a struggle she'd been facing at work, and I listened. Her tone was steady, but I could sense the vulnerability beneath, a crack in the composed surface she always presented to the world. I leaned slightly closer, drawn by the quiet intensity of her words, careful not to intrude. She paused occasionally, her gaze drifting, and for a fleeting moment, her shoulder brushed mine. It was accidental, or maybe it wasn't. The subtle weight of her presence against me was grounding, as if I'd become a safe place for her without realizing it. As the conversation continued, she shared small, intimate details of her life, memories of things she wished she'd done differently, moments of joy she rarely admitted aloud. I offered soft encouragement, listening more than speaking, letting her know through attentive silence that she was heard. Her eyes met mine occasionally, lingering just enough to convey unspoken trust and gratitude. At one point, she reached to adjust a pillow on the couch, and her hand briefly brushed mine. It was almost imperceptible, a fleeting touch, but it sent a shiver up my spine. I noticed the warmth of her skin, the smoothness of her fingers, and the quiet steadiness of her grip. It was intimate without being romantic, familiar without being casual, a delicate balance I hadn't experienced before. Time seemed to stretch and soften around us. The sounds of the city outside became a distant hum. The steam rising from the teacups mirrored the quiet tension between us. There was no rush, no expectation, only the slow unfolding of connection, of two people cautiously letting themselves exist in the same space, emotionally exposed yet safe. By the time I left, I felt lighter, as if a weight I hadn't fully acknowledged had been eased by her presence. Her small, effortless trust, the way she spoke, the way she allowed me close without asking, left a lingering warmth. For the first time, I realized that this slow, quiet intimacy might be the beginning of something deeper. Something that wasn't about grand gestures or fleeting passion, but about presence, trust, and the gentle, undeniable pull that neither of us could yet define. After our quiet conversation, everything seemed to shift in small, almost imperceptible ways. She started appearing more often in the spaces I frequented, by the mailbox, on the balcony, even in the hallway when I least expected it. Each encounter was fleeting, yet charged with a gentle tension that neither of us spoke aloud. It wasn't dramatic. It was subtle, the kind of slow-burning connection that builds quietly but leaves a lasting impression. One evening, I was carrying groceries up the stairs when she appeared at the landing, holding a basket of laundry. I stepped aside to let her pass, and as she brushed past me, our shoulders grazed again. It was a simple, almost accidental touch, but it lingered in my senses. The warmth of her skin, the softness of her sweater against my arm. I caught her hand for a brief moment as she steadied the basket, and our fingers met, lingering for an instant longer than necessary. Later, we found ourselves together in the shared garden. She was kneeling by a patch of flowers, her hair falling lightly over her shoulder, and I knelt beside her to help with a stubborn weed. Our knees brushed, our arms occasionally touched as we reached for the same plant, and each contact felt electric in the quiet of the afternoon. I noticed the subtle movements she made, a tilt of her head, a soft smile, the way her eyes crinkled when she laughed at something I said. Each gesture drew me closer without a word. Even in casual, mundane moments, her presence left an impression. When she passed me a watering can, her fingers barely brushed mine. When she adjusted a branch of flowers, her hand lingered near mine longer than it needed to. I found myself noticing everything. The faint scent of her perfume mingling with the earth, the warmth radiating from her skin, the soft rhythm of her breathing. Each tiny detail became a thread weaving us closer together. It wasn't just physical proximity, it was emotional as well. She spoke with a calm patience, listened with quiet attention, and somehow, in the simplicity of shared tasks, she made me feel understood. I began to anticipate her presence, the subtle brush of her hand, the way she leaned slightly when explaining something, the small, unspoken gestures that created an invisible bridge between us. By the end of the afternoon, as the sun dipped low, I realized that these lingering moments were no longer coincidences. Every touch, every glance, every laugh shared in quiet spaces was building a connection that neither of us could ignore. There was a pull between us, gentle but undeniable, a delicate dance of familiarity and desire. It wasn't spoken aloud, but it was present, in the way she leaned near, in the way I found myself wanting to be closer, and in the warmth that settled in my chest whenever she was near. For the first time, I understood that romance didn't always announce itself with grand gestures. Sometimes, it grew quietly, in stolen touches, lingering moments, and the gentle reassurance of shared presence. And with her, each passing moment felt like a promise of something deeper, slowly, inevitably unfolding. It was a rainy evening when everything shifted in a way I hadn't anticipated. I had stopped by her apartment to return a book she had lent me, and I found her sitting by the window, staring at the rain streaking down the glass. She didn't notice me at first. Her posture was tense, shoulders slightly hunched, as if the weight of something unspoken pressed down on her. I hesitated, unsure whether to speak or simply give her space. But the moment I stepped closer, she looked up, and I saw it. The vulnerability she usually kept tucked behind calm composure. There was a quiet heaviness in her eyes, a softness that made my chest tighten. Without a word, she shifted slightly, and in that small movement, she leaned against me. Her head rested lightly against my shoulder, and for a moment, the world outside, the rain, the distant city lights, the hum of traffic, seemed to fade. I could feel the steady warmth of her body, the gentle rhythm of her breathing, the subtle pressure of her presence grounding me. My arm instinctively went around her back, a natural, unforced gesture, and I felt the quiet weight of trust settling between us. We stayed like that in silence, the only sounds the soft patter of rain and our slow, steady breathing. I noticed the small details, the way her hair fell across my chest, the faint scent of her perfume mixed with the rain-scented air, the warmth of her skin pressing against mine. There was no rush, no expectation, only the raw, unspoken comfort of being close to someone who trusted you enough to lean on you, physically and emotionally. Her lips parted slightly as if to speak, but no words came. Instead, she simply rested, letting herself exist in that space with me. I felt a surge of protective tenderness, the kind of quiet, unspoken affection that doesn't need labels or explanations. My hand brushed a strand of hair from her face, and she didn't move away, a silent acknowledgement of closeness, a gentle permission that made my heart ache in the best way. I realized then that this moment wasn't just about physical touch. It was about connection, about vulnerability shared without fear, about two people allowing themselves to be present for each other. Her leaning on me wasn't accidental. It was deliberate in the way trust always is, quiet, powerful, and transformative. As the rain continued to streak the window, I felt a deep sense of warmth and intimacy. This wasn't romance as I had imagined in movies or novels. It was slower, richer, built on the foundation of emotional honesty and mutual care. And in that moment, when she leaned on me like she belonged there, I understood that we were crossing a threshold, one step closer to something profound, tender, and enduring. The rain softened outside, and yet inside, something had crystallized, a bond that didn't need words, a trust that felt as natural as breathing, and a subtle, undeniable pull toward each other that neither of us could ignore. After that rainy evening, everything between us seemed to exist in a delicate balance, closer than before, yet unspoken, fragile, and electric. We moved through our shared spaces with a quiet awareness of each other, small gestures carrying meanings we hadn't yet dared to voice. Every glance, every brush of a hand, every slight shift in posture seemed loaded with intention, though neither of us spoke it aloud. It happened during another ordinary encounter. A late afternoon in the garden, sunlight dappled through the leaves, casting patterns across her face. She was kneeling beside a flower bed, carefully pruning a plant, and I crouched nearby to adjust a fallen pot. Our knees brushed lightly. Our arms occasionally touched as we reached for the same tools, and in each touch, there was a language neither of us needed to speak. Her laughter rang softly when I teased her about being overly meticulous, and when she looked up, our eyes met. For a long moment, she held my gaze, steady, searching, and vulnerable all at once. I could feel the unspoken words hanging between us, suspended in the warm afternoon light. There was a desire there, quiet but undeniable, mingled with the familiarity of trust we had built over these past weeks. We continued our tasks, but our proximity felt different now. Her hand lingered near mine as she handed me a small gardening tool, and I didn't move it away. When she brushed a strand of hair from her face, her fingers grazed my shoulder. It was accidental, yet intentional in its intimacy. Each fleeting touch left a warmth that settled deep in my chest, a quiet acknowledgement of feelings that neither of us dared to articulate. Later, we sat on the garden bench, side by side, not touching but close enough to feel each other's presence. She tilted her head slightly, her gaze soft, and I realized how often I had been silently observing her, noticing the curve of her smile, the way her eyes glimmered when sunlight caught them, the warmth of her presence that seemed to seep into my very bones. I wanted to reach for her hand, to close the gap, but I held back, savoring the tension, the slow build of connection that didn't need words to exist. In that silence, confessions passed between us without uttering a single syllable. A fleeting glance, a subtle leaning toward one another, a shared laugh at the simplest remark. Each gesture was a declaration in its own right. The unspoken desire was palpable, yet respectful, tender, and restrained, as though acknowledging it too loudly would break the delicate intimacy we had carefully nurtured. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in hues of gold and rose, I realized we were standing at the precipice of something inevitable. The unspoken confessions, the lingering touches, the prolonged eye contact, the quiet, steady presence, had created a bond neither of us could ignore. It was a moment of understanding, a shared heartbeat, a silent acknowledgement that the connection between us had deepened into something far more profound than either of us had anticipated. The days that followed felt different, lighter, as though the small, unspoken moments we had shared had created a rhythm between us. There was no need for declarations or grand gestures. Our connection had become its own quiet language. I began noticing how naturally she settled into the spaces around me, how our interactions carried the ease of familiarity and the warmth of trust. One evening, she came by with a basket of freshly baked bread. I was in the kitchen, unpacking groceries, and as soon as she stepped in, the room seemed to expand. She moved past me with effortless grace, her hand briefly brushing mine as she set the basket on the counter. That simple touch, familiar now, carried a reassurance and comfort that made my chest tighten in a quiet, satisfying way. We settled at the small dining table, sharing slices of warm bread and tea. Conversation flowed easily, punctuated by laughter and soft smiles. At one point, She leaned slightly toward me, her shoulder touching mine, a gesture I had come to cherish. It was natural, unforced, and in that small closeness, I felt the depth of our bond. The age difference between us mattered less than the emotional intimacy we had cultivated, the understanding and care that existed between two people who had quietly allowed themselves to be vulnerable. Later, we moved to the balcony, where the city lights flickered like distant stars. She rested her head lightly against my shoulder, her fingers brushing against mine as she held her cup of tea. I let her stay, feeling the gentle steadiness of her presence, the warmth radiating from her, the subtle rhythm of trust and affection that had grown between us. It wasn't dramatic or sudden. It was steady, like the gentle tide, persistent and comforting. In those moments, I realized that romance doesn't always announce itself with fireworks or declarations. Sometimes, it arrives in quiet gestures, in shared silences, in the effortless comfort of leaning together and simply being present. She didn't need to speak to tell me she trusted me, and I didn't need to say anything to let her know she belonged there. It was mutual understanding, built slowly, deeply, with respect and care. By the time the night grew still, we remained on the balcony, shoulder to shoulder, savoring the warmth of proximity. There was a subtle magic in this slow-burn intimacy, in the lingering touches, the shared smiles, the soft laughter echoing in the evening air. It was a romance measured not in words, but in presence, and it felt complete. As I watched her glance at me, a quiet, knowing smile on her lips, I understood that our story had reached a place of fulfillment. She had leaned on me, physically, emotionally, and I had welcomed it fully, effortlessly. And in that acceptance, in that shared space of trust and warmth, I realized we had created something enduring, a gentle, profound love, quietly grown, naturally belonging to both of us. The story ended not with a dramatic confession, but with the comforting knowledge that we were there for each other, a slow, steady, and deeply satisfying connection, perfectly complete. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more slow burn, age gap romance tales. Comment below which moment between them made you feel the connection the most. I'd love to hear your thoughts.